God is still the same. Ask the grave if it's strong enough to keep hope in its chains. It'll say, God is still the same. Yeah, when did he break his promise? When did his kindness fail? Never has, never will. My God is still the same. When did he lose his power? When did his mercy change? Never has, never will. My God is still the same. Yeah, not once did he ever stop moving. Not once has he ever let go. Not once did he ever stop proving our God is in control. Not once did he ever stop moving. Not once has he ever let go. Not once did he ever stop proving our God is in control. When did he break his promise? When did his kindness fail? Never has, never will. My God is still the same.
This is leap year. So ordinarily, this Torah portion and the following one would be combined. So basically be a double reading. But since this is leap year, this Torah portion stands alone today. And it's relatively short as far as Torah portions go. It's only 2 chapters. So as I mentioned to someone, that will leave plenty of time for difficult questions, right? So, but also it leaves time for me to read a 1-page article before I even offer the blessing for the Torah portion, because it's not related directly to the Torah portion. This is an article that was shared with me that my wife Joanne had read, and it's titled Yom HaShoah, which means Day of Remembrance. And I think it would be good for us to reflect in advance. Now, that's kind of a tricky thing, isn't it? To reflect in advance, because generally reflection follows experience, right? But we're reflecting in advance of a remembrance. So that works. It works. Okay, it works. And it's a national remembrance in Israel. And it begins on May 5th this year. May 5th. So that is Shabbat. And it goes for that whole weekend. And it's remembrance of the Holocaust. Remembrance of the Holocaust. And so I think it behooves us to participate in that remembrance. And I want us to prepare for it. I'd like for you to prepare for it, to make it very personal. And so this is a 1-page article which hits pretty hard. It hits pretty hard, particularly those who are sensitive to receive it, to receive the message. It's a painful one. The remembrance is a very painful one, where during the Holocaust, the global Jewish population was nearly cut in half. Imagine that. Imagine if half the people of the United States were wiped out in a matter of a few years, say a decade. Not by a plague, but by the will of evil people. And not just the will of evil people, but the will of good people who turned a blind eye, who ignored the murder, the genocide of a people. And that's where our nation is culpable, particularly the leadership of our nation. Much admired. I mean, after all, the president at that time, was elected to 4 terms. No other president's been elected to more than 2. So it's particularly difficult also for American Christians, as we're very, very focused on a couple things. Our Christianity, theologically, for many, is centered around replacement theology, which basically, practically, ignores Israel. And the other side is, that goes along with that, is there is a degree of anti-Semitism behind that. It's systemic. The other side is this. We have what I might call a self-centered, arrogant view of our goodness gracious, as Christians, and of Christianity in general. So, and since it's very personal, we can actually step back and say, I understand there were atrocities committed by Christianity in the past. I understand it was for hundreds of years, but what has that to do with me? Because I am not anti-Semitic. I do not hate Israel. I do not hate the Jews. So what does that have to do with me personally? So it's important for us to recognize something. I'm not talking about you as an individual. I'm talking about you and myself as a nation, corporate. We do have a responsibility as a citizen of our nation. We do have a responsibility as well as a subject of the kingdom of God. And Israel has a very, not only important, but central role to play in the kingdom of God. And we, as Christians who embrace the Torah, which should not be a contradiction, unfortunately, culturally, it often is. We should identify with Israel. We should identify more closely with Israel than we do with our own nation as a citizen of American, of the United States of America. Yes, we have citizenship, but we have a citizenship in the kingdom of God, which is eternal. It's higher. So you could say, well, yeah, we have dual citizenship in that regard. And here's the key. We know that we have been grafted in to the branch. We've been grafted in to the promise given to Abraham. And we are, many of us, of the nations, being blessed through that blessing. So, I don't know exactly where to go with all of that, but at one place I want to go is for us to prepare and reflect on that, particularly with this coming up in the near future, May 5th. And to do that is a one-page article. It's titled Yom HaShoah, a day to remember, a day to mourn. At sundown on May 5th, the nation of Israel will come to a halt. Sirens will wail across the country. people will stop driving, stop walking, and simply stand silently. It is Yom HaShoah, the day when Israel renews the holy vow, never again. The demonic evil of anti-Semitism did not go away when the Holocaust ended. It is still alive and active in our world today. And it must be confronted. The only reason Auschwitz continued in operation until very near the end of the war is that those who could have stopped it did nothing. The United States refused to bomb the railroad tracks leading to Auschwitz with boxcars transporting innocent Jews to their deaths in the ovens there. Alan Dulles, probably not pronouncing that right, a U.S. diplomat assigned to monitor Nazi intelligence, furnished the United States government with a multitude of Nazi documents marked top secret. None of the approximately 300 documents provided specifically remarked on the killing of Jews, nor did any reveal the seriousness of Hitler's final solution. Neither was there any indication that the railroad tracks to Auschwitz should be bombed. Why did America and its allies look away? The answer is anti-Semitism. As with a cancer, it mutates and takes many forms. Today, anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. To understand this, one only need look at the number one country on which the United Nations vents its spleen over human rights and promotes the boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS movement. Israel. Anti-Semitism is the reason the United States and Great Britain, and indeed much of the world, closed their borders to Jewish refugees. A don't ask, don't tell policy was implemented in the 1930s when the events in Germany were uncovered. The British and the Americans combined dropped some 2.7 million tons of bombs on Germany. American planes were also used to drop supplies to Polish fighters. Such missions were commonplace during World War II. Perhaps it is not difficult then to understand why one of the most damning charges brought against Roosevelt and his administration was the failure to acquiescence to bombing the railroad lines that carried boxcars to Auschwitz. They were filled with Jews destined for the gas chambers inside its compound. It is possible that by the spring of 1944, such an action would have been practicable. Yet it was rejected with the official explanation that it would have taken necessary men and airplanes away from definite operations in other areas. That was seen as a smokescreen, especially since the Allies had already marked for destruction industrial complexes near the death camp. Historians believe that had American bombers been sent to target the railroads, thousands of Jews from Hungary and Slovakia might have lived. Sadly, polls taken during the late 1930s and early 1940s revealed more than 50% of the U.S. public surveyed asserted that Jews were a avaricious, and unscrupulous. And in response to U.S. refusal to aid Jews fleeing the Holocaust, Benjamin Netanyahu's father, the current prime minister of Israel, his father said, "The spirit of the swastika hovers over the stars and stripes." The German company IG Farben actually operated its own dedicated concentration camp. As the Second World War erupted, the company was the leading manufacturer in operation in Europe and fourth on the list of worldwide corporations. An IG Farben subsidiary distributed Zyklon B to Auschwitz. That was the poison gas utilized to kill over 1 million Jews in the gas chambers there. Statistics reveal that more than 1 of 6 Jews slaughtered in Europe was slain in Auschwitz. Woefully, the life expectancy of the Jewish workers at Buna Work was only 3 to 4 months. For those working in the mines, it was barely 1 month. Those deemed unfit to work at the facility were gassed. IG Farben's massive factory near Auschwitz was built to exploit the workforce imprisoned there. That concentration camp was, from its inception, an IG Farben undertaking. The plant supplied both synthetic rubber and liquid fuel. It also manufactured synthetic high-performance fuels, including aviation gasoline, an extremely crude version of bunker oil for ships, plastic synthetic fibers, stabilizers, and pharmaceuticals. Before the war, Germany had been forced to import 95% of its rubber. But due to IG Farben, that number soon shrank to 7%. IG Farben also ran the mines that provided 2 million tons of coal needed each year for both its factories. They were able to do this due to the more than 2 million inmates that passed through Auschwitz Camp Number 1 to meet Farben's labor demands. There are numerous questions surrounding Roosevelt and his refusal to at least allow the quota of 200,000 Jews to enter the U.S. Why were those places left unfulfilled? Why did the pleas of Jews trying to escape Hitler's final solution fall on deaf ears? Why were those aboard the St. Louis ship denied entry into the U.S.? Why were the railroad tracks leading to Auschwitz not bombed? Why did the U.S. not bomb the IG Farben plants? Why? 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 The question is not historical. The Western world, including America, is once again failing to take action to defend Israel. In fact, many are trying to tie Israel's hands as it defends itself against the worst attack since the miracle rebirth of the Jewish state in 1948. Thank you for listening. Let's begin our Torah portion. It begins on Leviticus chapter 12, verse 1, and we'll say the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech ha'olam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzavanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with thy commandments and commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of the Torah. The title of this Torah portion is Saria, and it means she conceives. There's another word that we need to define because I'm not going to use the word commonly translated for it. I'll be reading it directly from the Complete Jewish Bible, and that is the word Sara'at. Sara'at has been translated historically as leprosy, but it is not leprosy. It cannot be leprosy. It doesn't fit the definitions of leprosy. It is a skin disease, yes, but it's a skin disease that is supernatural. Supernatural. And it can inflict not only a person, but also garments, and even a home, one's house. Okay. So, begin. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell the people of Israel, if a woman conceives and gives birth to a boy, she will be unclean for 7 days, with the same uncleanness as in Nida, when she is having her menstrual period. On the 8th day, the baby's foreskin is to be circumcised. She is to wait an additional 33 days to be purified from her blood. She is not to touch any holy thing or come into the sanctuary until the time of her purification is over. But if she gives birth to a girl, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her nida, and she is to wait another 66 days to be purified from her blood. When the days of her purification are over, whether for a son or for a daughter, she is to bring a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or dove for a sin offering, to the entrance of the tent of meeting to the Kohen. He will offer it before Adonai and make atonement for her. Thus she will be purified from her discharge of blood. Such is the law for a woman who gives birth, whether to a boy or to a girl. If she can't afford a lamb, she is to take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, the one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. The Kohen will make atonement for her, and she will be clean." Chapter 13. Adonai said to Moshe and Aaron, "If someone develops on his skin a swelling, scab, or bright spot which could develop into the disease Sara'at, he is to be brought to Aaron the Kohen or to one of his sons who are Kohanim. The Kohen is to examine the sore on his skin. If the hair in the sore has turned white and the sore appears to go deep into the skin, it is Sara'at. And after examining him, the Kohen is to declare him unclean. If the bright spot on his skin is white, but it does not appear to go deep into the skin, and his hair has not turned white, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine him again, and if the sore appears the same as before and has not spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 more days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine him again. And if the sore has faded and hasn't spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to declare him clean. It is only a scab, so he is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads further on the skin after he has been examined by the Kohen and declared clean, he is to let himself be examined yet again by the Kohen. The Kohen will examine him, and if he sees that the scab has spread on his skin, then the Kohen will declare him unclean. It is sara'at. If a person has sara'at, he is to be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine him, and if he sees that there is a white swelling in the skin, which has turned the hair white, and inflamed flesh in the swelling, then it is chronic sara'at on his skin. And the Kohen is to declare him unclean. He is not to isolate him because it is already clear that he is unclean. If the sara'at breaks out over all the skin, so that as far as the Kohen can see, the person with sara'at has sores everywhere on his body, from his head to his feet, then the Kohen is to examine him, and if he sees that the sara'at has covered his entire body, he is to pronounce the person with the sores clean. It has all turned white, and he is clean. But if one day inflamed flesh appears on him, he will be unclean. The Kohen will examine the inflamed flesh and declare him unclean. The inflamed flesh is unclean. It is sara'at. However, if the inflamed flesh again turns white, he is to come to the Kohen. The Kohen will examine him, and if he sees that the sores have turned white, then the Kohen is to declare clean the person with the sores. He is clean. If a person has on his skin a boil that heals in such a way that in place of the boil there is white swelling of a reddish white bright spot, it is to be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine it. If he sees that it appears to be more than skin deep and his hair has turned white, then the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. The disease of sara'at has broken out in the boil. But if the Kohen looks at it and doesn't see any white hairs in it, and it isn't more than skin deep, but appears faded, the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. If it spreads on the skin, the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is the disease. But if the bright spot stays where it was and has not spread, it is the scar of the boil. And the Kohen is to declare him clean. Or, if someone has on his skin a burn caused by fire, and the inflamed flesh where it was burned has become a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the Kohen is to examine it, and if he sees that the hair in the bright spot has turned white, and that it appears to be deeper than the skin around it, it is sara'at. It has broken out in the burn. And the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a sore from sara'at. But if the Kohen examines it and sees no white hair in the bright spot, and it is no more than skin deep, but looks faded, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine him. If it is spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a sore from sara'at. But if the bright spot stays where it was and has not spread on the skin, but appears faded, it is a swelling due to the burn. And the Kohen is to declare him clean because it is only a scar from the burn. If a man or woman has a sore on the head, or a man in his beard, Then the Kohen is to examine the sore. If he sees that it appears to be deeper than the skin around it, with yellow, thin hair in it, then the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a crusted area, a sara'at of the head or beard. If the Kohen examines the diseased, crusted area and sees that it appears not to be deeper than the skin around it, and without any black hair in it, then the Kohen is to isolate for 7 days the person with the diseased, crusted area. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine the sore, and if he sees that the crusted area hasn't spread, that it has no yellow hair in it, and that the crusted area is not deeper than the skin around it, then the person is to be shaved, except for the crusted area itself. And the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 more days. On the 7th day, the Kohen is to examine the crusted area, and if he sees that the crusted area has not spread on the skin and does not appear to be deeper than the skin around it, then the Kohen is to declare him clean. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the crusted area spreads after his purification, then the Kohen is to examine him, and if he sees that the crusted area has spread on the skin, the Kohen is not to look for yellow hair. He is unclean. But if the crusted area's appearance doesn't change and black hair grows up in it, then the crusted area is healed. He is clean, and the Kohen is to declare him clean. If a man or woman has bright spots on his skin, bright white spots, then the Kohen is to examine them. If he sees that the bright spots on the skin are dull white, it is only a rash that has broken out on the skin. He is clean. If a man's hair has fallen from his scalp, he is bald, but he is clean. If his hair has fallen off the front part of his head, he is forehead bald, but he is clean. But if on the bald scalp or forehead there is reddish white sore, it is sara'at, breaking out on his bald scalp or forehead. Then the Kohen is to examine him. If he sees that there is a reddish white swelling on his bald scalp or forehead, appearing like sara'at on the rest of his body, he is a person with sara'at. He is unclean. The Kohen must declare him unclean. The sore is on his head. Everyone who has sara'at sores is to wear torn clothes and unbound hair. Cover his upper lip and cry, "Unclean! Unclean!" As long as he has sores, he will be unclean. Since he is unclean, he must live in isolation. He must live outside the camp. When sara'at inflects an article of clothing, whether it be a woolen or a linen garment, on the threads or the woven-in parts of either linen or wool, or on a hide or item made of leather, then if the stain on the garment, hide, threads, woven-in parts, or leather item is greenish or reddish, it is an infection of sara'at and is to be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine the stain and isolate the article that has the infection for 7 days. On the 7th day, he is to examine the stain. If the stain has spread on the garment, threads, woven in parts or leather, whatever its use, the infection is a contagious sara'at. The garment is unclean, He's to burn the garment, threads, woven in parts of either wool or linen or item of leather having the infection, for it is a contagious sara'at. It must be burned up completely. But if, when the Kohen examines it, he sees that the infection has not spread on the garment or in the threads woven in parts or leather item, then the Kohen is to order that the article having the infection be washed and isolated for 7 more days. The Kohen is to examine it after the stain has been washed, and if he sees that the stain has not changed color, then, even though the stain has not spread, it is unclean. You are to burn it up completely. It is rotten, no matter whether the spot is on the outside or on the inside. If the Kohen examines it and sees that the stain has faded after being washed, then he is to tear the stain out of the garment, leather, threads, or woven in parts. If it appears again in the garment, threads, woven in parts, or leather item, it is contagious. And you are to burn up completely the article that had the stain. But if the infection is gone from the garment, threads, woven in parts, or leather item that you washed, then it is to be washed a second time, and it will be clean. This is the law concerning infections of sara'at in a garment of wool or linen, or in the threads or the woven in parts, or in any leather item, when to declare it clean and when to declare it unclean. Well, I'm sure that was edifying for all of us. So, what questions might you have? Yes.
Hey, verse 45, is that the first mass?
What chapter? 13? Oh, there's only one with 14. 45?
13:45.
Yeah. Okay, what's the question?
Or is that the first face mask?
Oh, well, I guess
Find a young kid.
it doesn't. Yeah, it says cover his upper lip. I always assumed myself that it was with the hand. I always assumed, because, But what if the guy didn't have a hand? So you're right, maybe.
Well,
Yeah, well, I think that's a good question. I don't know. I never really thought of it that way. I like that, though. That's definitely thinking outside the box for me. It's okay, because it doesn't actually specify that I can see. So, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Brian. That's great. So I have a question and then a comment.
Oh, okay.
So, Yom Hoshon,
Yeah?
how do you spell that?
Which one?
Yom Hoshon?
Hashoah?
However you
Oh, yeah, Yom, Y-O-M,
Okay.
transliteration. H-A. Shoah, S-H-O-A-H.
That was the never again. So when you read that article, I don't know if individuals are aware, but Eric McTaxis has written a book entitled The Letter to the Church, and it's based off of Bonhoeffer's work and what he was experiencing in Germany at that time. And that book has been made into a movie of the same title, and it's out at Epic Times. And I've read the book and watched both the movie, and it's a really good presentation of America's responsibilities,
Wow.
or even what's going on now. Eric McTaxis wrote a book called A Letter to the American Church, and then that has also been made into a movie.
What's the title of the movie?
The same thing.
Oh, A Letter to the American Church.
Yes.
Oh, but it's a movie actually, but it's called A Letter. Okay, that's somewhat confusing to some of us more literally minded people.
Sorry.
A
Well,
letter.
we made it simple. It's the title
For most,
Okay.
so,
No, that's good. Thank you. No.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow.
Weren't there some Jews, I mean, maybe a handful that did make it, that were accepted to come?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
It just amazes me how they didn't do anything to help them, but then they're letting our borders.
Yeah.
I mean, our borders are being flooded with.
Well, I knew it would be shocking to probably most of us that were unaware of our nation's culpability. But and we still struggle with it today. We do indeed. There are a number of Holocaust museums across the country. I think there's the national one in Washington, D.C., if you have a chance to go to it. There's also a Holocaust museum in Israel itself, national one. And there is a Holocaust museum here in Indiana. It's in Terre Haute. It's called Candles. Candles. So, yeah.
Yes.
John.
Prior to and during World War II, the New York Times, a Jewish-owned newspaper, by the way, at the time, and it probably still is, the New York Times obscured the Holocaust, and that has factually been proven. They downplayed it. They only published short pieces far back in the newspaper rather than front page. So my question is anyone aware of the nature of the coverage of Israel in its war in Gaza? Is the New York Times again obscuring the truth of this war, or are they clearly portraying Israel's risk during the war? Anyone knowledgeable can comment.
I'm hoping she'll answer your question, John.
Yes, this is to answer John's question. It's not just the New York Times, it's a lot of other news coverages as well, because they have proven that the story about Israel bombing the hospital is untrue, that it was a Palestinian missile that misfired, didn't go to the right place, or it did go to the right place, directed by God. But they have not retracted their reports, and so the false reporting is still out there if you were to go and Google it.
What diseases are on clothing besides leprosy that you would have to burn your clothing, according to what you were reading?
The what? I didn't catch that. Well, I do have my hearing aids on, but I always do that to stall for time. And just for clarification, to make sure I truly grasp the question.
Stand under there. What disease besides leprosy that is on your clothing that you have to burn your clothing according to what you read?
Okay, good. What is it? It's not leprosy. That's why I use sara'at. It's not leprosy. Leprosy is a translation. Leprosy is an actual disease. It's been documented. This is not leprosy.
What is it?
Translate it, it's sara'at.
What is that?
Okay.
English. I need English right now.
Okay. It is a supernatural plague from God. It's hard to define because I want to say it's a type of blessing.
Doesn't make sense.
It's a type of blessing because it comes upon the Jews.
But you said it's a disease.
Yes. It's a negative blessing. See, there are positive commandments and negative commandments, right?
Does he have his hair?
That's why I said I wanted to say that, not, because when I had gout, now gout, how many have had gout here? How many will admit to having gout? Okay, the reason I say how many admit to having gout is because gout is a self-inflicted disease. It's based upon your diet. It's usually because you've overindulged in some food items that you really like to such an extent that, well, I'm not going to explain the whole gout thing to you, but the point is you get to that point to where you are suffering because of what you have done. And when you stop doing that, it goes away. Not as fast as you would like, but it goes away. And then if you watch your diet from then on, you won't get it again. It is very painful. My wife made me go to the hospital because she says, I'm not going to have you crawling through the house to go to the bathroom. And she's a registered nurse, so I painfully made my way to the VA. Oh, wait, we got a question over here. It's okay.
Can clothes transmit disease? Some STDs, such as pubic lice, scabies, molluscums, contagiums, can be transmitted by sharing clothes with an infected person. These infections can spread through any type of physical contact, not necessarily sexual contact. They may also spread through linen or bedding used by an infected person. So it's up above, it says some skin diseases such as dermatitis, scabies, fungal diseases can be transmitted wearing unwashed secondhand clothes.
Okay. So, thank you.
All right, I'll go real quick. I'll make this quick. First of all, it's called Sa'arat. That's the plague. The reason why there's no English equivalent is because there is no English equivalent. This plague, it's called a naga. It's the Hebrew word that means, literally, the Hebrew word plague comes from the root word, which means to touch. You've been touched by God, basically. Something's wrong in your life, and you've been touched by God. So there is...
And how is that a bad thing?
So this is not a disease like cancer. This is not a disease like leprosy, because those are physical diseases. This is a naga. This is a touch from God. So the Sa'arat, there's no English name for it because it's specifically when there's a priesthood available and when there is a system in place. It also is the reason why we don't get Sa'arat is because we aren't at the spiritual level of the people of the Bible. God is not dwelling as closely as He's not dwelling as evidently as they did when they had a temple or a tabernacle. And so we're not as sanctified, if that makes sense, physically. We're spiritually sanctified higher through the Holy Spirit, we're in the context of what we're looking at here. There's a lot of we're talking about ritual impurity, ritual purity, and the in-between zone where you are ritually pure, where you're not ritually unpure, but you're not ritually pure either. There is a zone. So this plague is a touch from God because something has gone wrong in your life that you're not listening to God. So He's tapping you on the shoulder. And it's supernatural. It's out of this world, and in a way, consider yourself blessed that you almost have leprosy. And it's painful, you have to be separated from the community, but you can look at it as a blessing, because if you use the process right, if you use that to work on yourself, to heal the things that God is wanting you to heal in your life, then the next Torah portion is called Metzora, which shares the same root word for Tza'arat. It's a person who has Tza'arat. He has a way to come back in after he's done business with God. He can now come back into the community. So it's an opportunity for you to go out in the wilderness one-on-one. Now, clothes is pretty interesting, because clothes, it starts with the clothes. Rabbinic tradition says it starts with the clothes. That's the first thing that God sends a plague to, your clothes. Then, if you do not listen, it goes to your house. Then, if it does not go to your house, then it goes to you. And there's an order. It's talking about whenever you see these in your life, think of God as Naga. He's touching you. He's tapping you on the shoulder.
So we see that it's, thank you for that explanation, Don. I appreciate that. It was very well done. We have another question. I want to comment on what Johnny just said with that. There is this whole idea of it being a blessing is for that very purpose, because you have opportunity to repent. God has gotten your attention because he touched you. So my question for you is, how many of you want to be touched by God?
All of it.
It's something to think about, right? But God, that's a very intimate thing, and for the nation in the land at those times, and oh well, okay.
Okay. Now, that is really cool, and that makes sense. But you also talked about the Sarat, or however you pronounce it, that was contagious. Okay, so, like, where's that coming from then? I mean, if it's contagious, I would think God wouldn't touch somebody.
I know. We use English words to try and translate. That was the problem with the leprosy part, too.
Yeah, okay.
So, as I recall, the contagious, it was the garment that was contagious, right? Donnie will clarify that.
So it's not contagious in the way you think of a disease as contagious.
Yeah.
It's not like I have leprosy, I'm going to Tza'arat, and I'm going to touch my buddy Mike Runkle, he's going to get Tza'arat. What it's actually going to be is when I get Tza'arat, I have impurity. I'm physically impure. Impure means you cannot go into the temple. If you're tahor, you can go into the temple. That is, you're permitted into sacred space. But if you're tameh, unclean, you're not permitted in sacred space. So when I get Tza'arat, that is a high level of tameh that clings to me. It's not the Tza'arat, the plague, that gets contagious. It's the uncleanness that's from that, because I can't go into the sanctuary. I touch my buddy Mike Runkle. He now has uncleanness, and he cannot go into sacred space before a sacred holy God.
Like touching a dead body, something like that. Or a corpse, whatever. Yeah. Animal even.
So, I haven't studied much in Leviticus, but it's interesting. You know, it talks about the women being unclean by their bleeding, and it not being studied, it would appear to me that maybe it was the cleanliness of the day, what was available to them, or is this spiritual? Is this, you mentioned ritualistic? Not sure, you know, there's X amount of days for different types of bleeding or birth or whatever. Not sure about that.
I would answer that question as a yes. Because God invokes both ways. There are biblically diseases that could be prevented if you follow the wholesomeness of the teaching. Physical ailments that will not come upon you, but it's primarily spiritual And that's the focus. But there's none of these diseases that fell upon the Egyptians were coming upon Israel. Also, even when they were encamped, they couldn't just go wherever they wanted to or when they needed to go. They had to, and they all had to carry their trowel with them too. And they had to bury their defecation. So that helped keep the camp clean compared to many of the other, particularly military encampments of the day, and even our own if soldiers were not given the tight rein by their leadership to utilize the latrine, which they had to dig. It's like, oh, bad enough we have to dig a foxhole, we even have to dig a foxhole for our excrement. Oh, okay, so whatever. Okay.
Okay, so Steve, you're right on the money, and Donnie too. When God's presence, the reason they built the tabernacle was so God's presence could dwell among them. Okay, and He's a holy God, and so there were fences put around that to make sure nothing unholy, nothing ritually impure could approach Him, because if you did, it was death. And so this plague of leprosy, and I'll just use the word leprosy because that's the only word I got to use. It's, Bible history is future prophecy. This whole concept, this lesson on leprosy. Leprosy represents a dead man. Remember when Miriam received leprosy? Moses prayed, let her not be like a dead man. So leprosy represents what sin does to humankind, and in order to return back to God, that has to be destroyed. It has to be cleansed. And so leprosy, we talk about one of the signs of the Messiah, the true Messiah, when he came, that he would be the leper Messiah. In other words, he would be the one that would come, and if he healed the leper, they knew that was the Messiah. And so that represents that the Messiah was the only one that could cure a dead man disease, a dead man disease of sin. And so there's prophetic connections there. And so I just wanted to bring that point in, that nothing unholy or impure can approach a holy God. In the millennial reign, we're going to have the same situation. We have Christ reigning from Jerusalem, but his Father cannot dwell in the presence, of men when there's impurity, ritual impurity, and death and sickness, because that won't be taken care of till the end of the millennium. So that's why the temple is so relative to the millennial period. And we can see lots of references to that. So if you're interested in the temple, there's a temple conference coming in July. It's mentioned in here, so sign up for it and learn more about it.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. And is that? Oh, yeah. Sorry. I missed that. Last comment.
First question is, in San Francisco, there is an application that you can put on your phone that is a poop locator application since people defecate in public in San Francisco today. Does that render the whole city unclean, or does the app allow someone who is observing cleanliness rules to avoid the poop on the sidewalk or wherever they find it?
Wow. Yeah, unfortunately, we've completely run out of time. As fascinating as that is, but I'm sure afterwards we'll get some minds together and try to answer that fascinating question. Let me close with a blessing. Great peace have those who love your Torah. Nothing can make them stumble. Shabbat shalom.